You will not achieve lasting weight loss without incorporating longer rounds of fasting into your regimen. Trust me when I say this, I've helped over thousands of patients over the last 2 decades, both with no fasting, intermittent fasting, and prolonged fasting. You have to understand, lasting weight loss is very different than initial weight loss. And when we look at the data, it is very clear we are doing something wrong. 80% of people will fail to maintain their weight loss over the next several years. So something is very, very off. Without massive hormonal improvement, of which I have only seen longer fasting very much accomplish. And by the way, we make it way easier with the peptides and the medications. You are never going to achieve lasting weight loss, the kind of weight loss where you can just slip back into normal life and be able to live your life and maintain your weight. We're going to get into it in this video. All right, so the current scene when it comes to weight loss, it's awful. I mean, look, I showed you that study earlier. I'll show it to you again. The reality is we as a society have failed to figure out the medical data, the science. We talk about being this scientifically backed system which operates off, but we can't seem to figure this one out. Lasting weight loss has been very elusive. And so the data shows it, like we talked about earlier, 80%. And I want you guys to understand that 80% of all weight loss measures, this is with medications, without, the data shows about only 1 out of 5 of you have been and will be successful with long-term weight maintenance. So something is very wrong here. And clearly we just don't have an understanding of what the problem is to begin with. Now, what's even more interesting and what makes this more confusing, because maybe you guys haven't seen this or you have heard, but there's a lot of arguments and a lot of controversy between what is the basis of hormones, right? What is the hormonal basis of obesity? Is it all about calories? Is it all about hormones, right? And I've made many other videos where I get into this, but the argument of calories, which has always been this focus, what we have always assumed is the way to be successful long-term with losing weight and maintaining it, we have these very confusing randomized controlled human trials. This one right here says, regardless when calories were accounted for, it didn't matter what you did with your hormones. Specifically, insulin is always the one that we talk about, and we're definitely going to talk about that later. Regardless of what you did with your hormones, specifically insulin, it didn't matter. If you're in a caloric deficit, you were going to lose weight. So these human randomized control studies are a freaking big deal because it's the highest level of data when we look at methods of fat loss. And it did show that lowering insulin via intermittent fasting or lowering carbohydrate intake did not produce any more fat loss than the other groups that didn't do the low carb, didn't do the fasting. Again, they were in the same caloric deficit and they lost the same amount of weight. So this is a paradox. This is a very confusing situation, to say the least, because on one side of the equation, we have high-level data showing us that it's all about calories. Clearly, we compared it. Optimizing your hormones didn't come close. It was all about just getting to the caloric deficit. But then at the same time, we have research where they actually looked at successful long-term weight maintenance, and they failed to see results. And so putting that together can be very confusing and very frustrating, to say the least. And so this is why, in my opinion, based off of backed up for 20 years of working with clients and patients and my own personal struggles, if you guys didn't know this already, I lost 100 pounds when I was 16 years old. And this was a journey for me. And I unfortunately failed to keep it off for over a decade. So it took me a long time to figure out what I need to do with my body. And that was optimizing my hormones, lowering insulin levels. And then I did it with patients over the past 10 years, seeing unequivocally a higher level of success with long-term weight loss maintenance when we lowered those chronically elevated insulin levels. The way that I was able to achieve the lowering of my insulin levels was by incorporating longer rounds of fasting. Look, there's many ideas and many theories of how we can lower chronically elevated levels. We know that chronically elevated insulin levels are also a result of having insulin resistance. And insulin resistance is something that we're going to get into shortly. But the most aggressive thing that we can do is fasting. And the most aggressive version of fasting is prolonged fasting. And guess what I created throughout this is the FLOA protocol, FLOA, fasting like our ancestors. This is the world's most aggressive prolonged fasting regimen, and backed up by 20 years of working with patients and working with clients throughout the many gyms that I managed and the thousands of clients that we had under our personal trainers. Counting calories was just a significantly more difficult way to accomplish weight loss, and it just didn't work long term. And at the end of the day, as much as you are focused right now watching this video, probably on weight loss, I know deep down you wouldn't argue with me or disagree with me that you really care more about your ability to maintain that weight loss, right? Let me know in the comments if you're focused more on the now and not the long term, because I couldn't think of anything more frustrating than taking the time, putting all this effort forth, putting your best foot forward, actually losing weight, only to experience weight regain over the next 3 to 6, 9 months, year, and thereout. So it's very frustrating. And this is the yo-yo. This is the song and dance that everybody, unfortunately, has to endure because, again, we lack a proper structure. We lack a framework. So when I say something like, you got to do longer rounds of fasting, it's very difficult and challenging to understand because it goes against the status quo. So let's take a step back here and let's look at the hormonal basis of obesity, because I think once we unravel that, it'll begin to make much more sense. Okay, so the calorie counting idea, we get it. It says weight loss and weight gain is simply the result of calories in versus calories out. That's it. Very simplistic viewpoint. When we start looking at this hormonal basis of obesity, we start unraveling the complexities that exist among and within the body. So let's start with, before we even get into that, let's dig into a little bit of history. You might find it very interesting to know that prior to the 1950s, the status quo among the scientific community and doctors alike was, hey, obesity, diabetes, let's eat less carbohydrates. Like we actually knew that for over 100 years. Just ask your mother or your grandparents, mother, father, or grandparents, depending on how old you are watching this video now, but what they did. Ask them what they did for obesity. What was the standard protocol? And you'd be surprised to hear that generally it was this idea of let's eat less refined carbohydrates. There was no idea at all back in the day, prior to 1950s, that excessive consumptions of fat or protein or anything like that would cause weight gain. They knew very well that excessive refined carbohydrates are what caused obesity and not a result of anything else. Then something actually changed in the 1950s. We noticed an increase in the amount of deaths due to heart disease. And this was a big deal because we see a massive increase in heart disease. Researchers are trying to figure out exactly what's going on. We didn't realize other stuff was going on. It could have been a change in the smoking levels. It could have been a change in the deaths due to infections. We got a lot better with our advancements in antibiotics and vaccinations and public health measures. So there was certainly other plausible explanations, but we didn't look at that. And so between 50s and 70s ensued this massive debate, of, hey, it might be saturated fat and cholesterol consumption that's causing heart disease. And which, again, if you think about history, that doesn't make sense that all of a sudden the amount of fat that we have been eating and consuming, and cholesterol as well, didn't change. How would that all of a sudden cause heart disease? But again, the powers that be, this debate ensued, and something pretty wild happened in about 1977, a monumental time in history. Unfortunately, not for the good, not for the better, but the government, Big Brother, decided to step in and make a decision for us. And what's so wild to me, maybe not wild because I've been helping people for so long and dealing with the powers that be, there was no advancement in the literature. Right? It'd be one thing if we came out and said, hey, there was a big randomized control study and we can tell, hey, it's pretty undeniable, saturated cholesterol fat, this is a problem. But that never happened. Yet, despite that, the government stepped in and said, yep, it is saturated fat and it is cholesterol. That's it. And so we need to change that, right? Well, when you decrease the consumption, and they did a very powerful campaign afterwards that didn't just impact the United States, but it actually impacted the rest of the world. The rest of the world followed suit. And we had this global reaction to decrease our consumption of fat and cholesterol. Well, remember, there's only 3 sources of calories. We have fat, protein, carbohydrates, 9 calories, 4 calories, 4 calories. So if you decrease consumption of fat, you're only left with protein and carbohydrates, and you can only eat so much meat and so much protein. So that leaves you undeniably with an increase in carbohydrates. You guys remember this food pyramid? Boy, oh boy, does that food pyramid tell us something, right? I mean, I could tell you growing up, in the school lunches, everywhere I went, it was carbs, carbs, carbs. You got the freaking chocolate milk with the fruit cup that's loaded with sugar, the white bread sandwich, the crackers, and the dessert. Talk about loading us up with carbohydrates. all throughout childhood, didn't change when I get to adulthood. And then we become adults where maybe some of us become more conscious about, I want to eat healthier. So we've always knew that processed foods were a problem. So I started eating less processed foods, but I'm still thinking that the ideal, looking at this pyramid here, 60% carbohydrate consumption. So even the very definition of what I thought was healthy has been wrong this entire time. So this monumental change in our diet where we essentially were forced to eat more carbohydrates, right? Now, the other big change too as well was snacking, right? So if you look at this graph right here, snacking massively shifted from prior to this point to afterwards. It was more of a 3 squares kind of day situation, and that was it. If you missed a meal, there was no replacement. You just handled it to the next meal, and that's what you did. Now all of a sudden you wake up, you're told the first thing you got to do is eat breakfast, and then you got to snack, and then you got to eat lunch, and then you got to snack again, and then you're told to snack before bed. Snack. Every single time you eat, you have an increase in insulin. And every time you eat specifically carbohydrates and processed carbohydrates and sugars, you have an even larger spike in insulin. Insulin. We're going to get into insulin here in a second and its exact mechanisms and how it's involved with the hormonal basis of obesity and what actually drives, in my opinion, the problems that we're all enduring. But we unfortunately experienced in the last 50 years a massive exposure to more insulin, which ultimately then leads to the development of insulin resistance. Okay, so insulin is a hormone that's responsible for driving the nutrients from the blood into the cells of your body. That's what happens in a healthy body. So all those times you were eating as a child, before you became insulin resistant, you ate food, a lot of sugar, a lot of processed crap, blood sugar goes up, insulin rises, blood sugar lowers, insulin lowers. Well, through the chronic exposure of that over time, you eventually develop a condition called insulin resistance, where your body is no longer responding to the insulin as well. Okay, so now as a result of having some resistance to insulin, your body's only mechanism left is to release more insulin, which is a breaking point for most people because now they have insulin being produced by their body just to keep their blood sugar levels down, not even in reaction to food anymore. And that becomes a slippery slope because insulin resistance is self-perpetuating, because if you think about it, insulin resistance leads to more insulin. More insulin leads to more resistance leads to more insulin. It's like a hamster wheel, moving. And unfortunately, it's rolling in the wrong direction. So that's a big deal. And at the basis of the hormonal approach, it's understanding that insulin is the culprit.
Quick minute here. I wanted to tell you guys about my free resources to help you guys with your sustainable weight loss goals. I have a free Facebook community where I do weekly live coaching. It's all about helping you hit your goals and maintain your weight for the rest of your life. And I also have a free PDF where I break down step by step exactly what it takes for you to be successful. I'll put a link to this in the show, and we'll see you guys back in the show.
So let's dive into insulin, right? Why is insulin the primary culprit here? By definition, insulin will make you fat. And there's really no other hormone in the body that has such a profound effect at making you directly fat. Cortisol, you can say, when injected, if given and injected to somebody, will make you fat too. And we could talk about cortisol later. Essentially, cortisol increases blood sugar, which ultimately is the insulin, right? So it causes insulin increase. So insulin, again, is that primary fat creating hormone. And you can literally see it through all the various aspects of medicine and health. For example, let's just look at diabetics. Type 1 diabetes is a condition of a lack of production of insulin. And you look at these individuals who were type 1 diabetic before we had insulin available as medicine, and they were emaciated. They were undernourished, and they eventually died at a very young age because they couldn't get nutrition into their body, into the cells, right? What is type 2? A condition where your body is resistant to insulin. So instead of having no or low insulin, you have high insulin levels. We always see in type 2 diabetics, almost always, excessive fat gain. They're overweight. A lot of them are obese. And additionally, the condition itself, type 2 diabetes, we see weight gain. Let's look at the medications, right? Almost every single medication for diabetes that either increases insulin directly or improves insulin sensitivity. Not everyone, but most of them, we will see the same thing. We will see weight gain. And then we look at metformin, a medication that does not increase insulin levels or increase insulin resensitization. It lowers blood sugar levels via blocking the mechanisms of glycogen, specifically working against the hormone glucagon so that it decreases the glycogen release, which is the stored form of sugar. So it blocks the liver from releasing it. So we have lower blood sugars. And what do we see? Unlike most other weight loss medications, specifically most other diabetic medications, we see weight loss. Metformin and GLP-1 medications, right, are the few diabetic medications that don't cause weight gain. GLP-1s are in its own category because in addition to making you more insulin sensitive, they have a powerful appetite suppressing effect that seems to override it. So we see not only medical conditions, but we also see medications in the diabetes space, even outside of diabetes management. You have various neuropathy, various hormonal medications where the medication itself has a mechanism on insulin, specifically either increasing insulin levels or making you more insulin sensitive, and you will see weight gain. Okay. So insulin is a powerful hormone that puts your body into fat storage mode and blocks the ability to lipolysize, to break down fat, and makes it very, very difficult. So if you are losing weight when you have an elevated level of insulin, this is where it gets really dicey because your body is in need of that energy because you're not eating enough, you're in a caloric deficit. So we almost always see some metabolic downregulation and a decrease in the metabolic rate. Okay, so to get a better understanding of what insulin's effect does, let's look at the weight set point theory, because this is what I have seen for over 20 years, tried and true with people, and let's get into it. So the weight set point theory tells us that our body's weight is similar to that of a thermostat in a house, okay? So the thermostat is a master temperature regulator in the house. If it says 80 degrees, it's doing everything it can to get the house at 80 degrees and keep it, right? And it can heat up and it can cool down and affect the whole house, okay? So let's say you are in the room, in one of the rooms, and you bring in a portable AC unit. You bring in a portable AC unit, you can decrease the temperature around you, right? 80, 78, 76, 74. But at some point, the thermostat kicks in and overrides that small AC unit and eventually will bring that room up to 80 degrees over enough time in spite of that small AC unit being on. So now we have a situation where it's back to 80 and you have that portable AC unit on that you didn't have before, right? Does that sound all too familiar to you watching this? Because I know if you're struggling with weight loss and you're watching this isn't your first rodeo. This isn't the first time that you've had difficulty with losing weight and regaining it. I have this really awesome video on weight loss plateaus, so I'll put that in the show notes, but definitely want to check that out. Okay, so this mechanism from your body, what's actually happening, similar to the situation with the thermostat and the AC unit, is you start a weight loss program. So you create a caloric deficit, either via exercise or eating less, because both of them can provide you a deficit, one or both. You lose X amount of weight, 5 pounds, 10 pounds, 20 pounds, 50 pounds. It's actually very interesting to note that there seems to be 20 years of working with patients, a completely random point at which people hit that plateau. But I can tell you it happens, and it happens to everybody. It's just a matter of when. So you create this caloric deficit, right? By exercising, by eating less, you lose some weight, but then you stop. The reason why you stopped losing weight is a effect on your body that was outside your control. And what we know is insulin and other hormones too as well, but we're keeping this simple for you guys to follow, that there is a change in your metabolic rate. So your metabolism can be broken down into a few components, but the biggest contributor is what we call BMR, or basal metabolic rate. That's the amount of calories that your body burns at rest. So the BMR can be influenced by your hormones. And so we see this. You can actually measure free fraction T3 on a blood level and see people in plateaus and have lower levels of free T3. And you'll even see low thyroid symptoms too as well that they didn't have before. They'll be more brain foggy. They'll have lower levels of energy. It's very easy to diagnose without the blood tests after seeing so many patterns of this. So we are struggling in this situation. We see these symptoms and we hit a hard stop. And that, just like that situation where you have the AC unit running with a thermostat overriding that, you have your body overriding your caloric approach, your caloric attempt towards losing weight. Unfortunately, then some people take it further and they eat less or they exercise more, and you can see what a slippery slope that is because your BMR continues to decrease. And it's not just your BMR. Your body has a whole other pathway at trying to implement the override, right? Get you to stop losing weight. Just as much as it can crank down your internal machinery, your internal metabolism, it can crank on the hunger. And I know anybody watching this video right now knows how hungry they can get when they're on a diet. When they're on a weight loss program, it comes and goes and it comes in waves, but that hunger becomes worse and stronger and you're unable to persevere through it and sustain through it until you give in and start eating more and start putting on back fat, and then your body gets back to a baseline. So this is the weight set point theory, and I believe this to be unequivocally true because I see it time and time again. Remember, I have clinics that service across the nation, achieving lasting weight loss, and we focus on the hormonal basis of obesity. We understand that calories matter, right? We have the RCTs and the human data to show us that, but at the end of the day, whether you are going to end up in a caloric deficit or a caloric surplus ultimately is not something that is really in your conscious control. Yes, you can make a conscious decision to overeat or undereat, but at the end of the day, you are operating via the control and effect from your hormones most of the time. You can't choose when to be hungry. And this is the part that is just almost comical when I see such a strong opposition to the hormonal basis and that it doesn't matter and that it's all about calories. You can't choose when to be hungry, right? It's not a decision you get to make. You can choose your best to override it and you do your best, but we all know you're not overriding it for that long, right? You can't choose and make a decision to crank your metabolism up. Wouldn't that be nice? I know I'd love that. Let me know in the comments if you'd love to be able to push a button and crank on that metabolism, right? So we have a body that's dramatically influenced by insulin. Calories matter as the end-all be-all thing that we can say, hey, we're in a surplus, we're in a deficit, but that isn't the actual problem if the caloric surplus or deficit is ultimately controlled by hormones like insulin. This is where this basis of the hormonal basis of obesity comes from, and we just have to understand that we can't throw calories out completely, right? We can't. But at the end of the day, I can tell you from 20 years of working with patients, lasting weight loss is significantly easier if we can get, like the main point I want to get across is getting your chronically elevated insulin levels down, okay? And we're just about to get into the best ways to do that. Okay, so the best methods for lowering your insulin levels, and I will argue this and fight this tooth and nails, is longer rounds of fasting. Right? That's why you're here. That's what caught your attention at the beginning of this video, is why you need to be doing longer rounds of fasting. I can tell you intermittent, which is great. That's your 16-8 approach where you are fasting for 8 hours. 8 hours are in the day and 8 hours of sleep, right? So it's on average 16 hours of fast and 8 hours eating window. That's great. That's a phenomenal start, and it's good base. Anybody that's got more than 10, 20, 30 pounds to lose, it's just not going to be enough for most of us. This is where prolonged fasting comes in because it is much more powerful, right? We're talking 24 hours or more, okay? Remember, we talked about insulin resistance, that condition that develops, and the result of it is more insulin levels. So the two things that are driving our insulin levels up are the actual food that we're eating and the snacking, and the fact that we have resistance. So we got to stop eating those foods and we got to heal the resistance. And that's the big difference between just losing weight or achieving lasting weight loss, okay? Because that thermostat, that model that we're talking about, right, where your body wants to maintain a certain weight, that is driven by insulin. So it's one thing to say I can lower my insulin levels low enough, get into a caloric deficit to achieve weight loss. But did I really heal the resistance enough to where long term it's going to be easier to keep my insulin levels down? If I lower my insulin levels and I somewhat heal the resistance, do we see where I'm going with this, right? We have to remember we're operating in a space right now where we don't have human randomized control studies that can say it is all about insulin. I am fighting tooth and nail to get us there, and I'm super excited for the future. And I do believe when they finally do the right tests, I think we're going to have that. But unfortunately, we don't. And so I'm going to call it theory and 20 years experience too as well. So the most effective long fasting program we call the FLOA protocol, FLOA, This is what my life's work has brought me to this point. I've created the FLOA protocol, which is the world's most aggressive, prolonged fasting regimen. I have another great video where I take specifically a deep dive into prolonged fasting. Check that video out. This video is more about why this is your solution long-term. But look, the FLOA protocol, we get our patients into weekly long rounds of 36 or even 48 hours every single week. There's some science behind this. We don't want to be fasting more than 2.5 days every single week. We can get some metabolic downregulation. We cannot afford to have micronutrient deficiencies. And so what I figured out is the most aggressive fast that we can do on a weekly basis where most people aren't going to experience the negatives. Now, the implementation of the FLOA protocol is crucial, and we have coaching and we have various tiers and levels, so I'll link to that in the description too as well if you're interested. But it's longer fasting. Whether you do it from my program, whether you do it on your own, I just want you guys to understand that if you want to achieve lasting weight loss, you have to be doing, in my opinion, longer rounds of fasting, because, and this is where we're going to bring it all together here before we end this video, short-term weight loss, lasting weight loss, very different. You can just go take semaglutide or tirzepatide and not even worry about fasting at all, and you're probably going to lose a ton of weight. A lot of people are doing this right now, but our phones are ringing every single day with so many people because they're wondering why they're regaining all that weight as soon as they stop. You can see from this study right here with semaglutide, within a single year, 70% of people regain their weight back. And again, as I said earlier, this isn't a weight loss medication phenomena. This is weight loss as a whole is difficult to lose weight. So it's not just the medications. But if you want to be successful at achieving lasting weight loss, then it's what you do during the weight loss that is going to set you up for success. And there's a lot of pieces to this. It's not all about insulin. But if I had to choose the one thing to focus on that is going to have the most dramatic impact for the most amount of people, it is hands down, no argument. Let's get those insulin levels down. And the most powerful method that I know of getting those insulin levels down is via longer fasting. And the only structured approach I know of is FLOA. I hope you guys found this video informative. I told you that I would link to a couple of videos. So from watching this, if you are struggling with a weight loss plateau, then you're definitely going to want to check this video out here where I break down the nuance of specifically what you need to do to get out of the plateau, and then more importantly, how to get back into weight loss so that you don't hit another plateau. We'll see you guys later. If you guys found this informative, then you're going to want to click this video right there. It's a continued explanation of what you learned today, guys. Knowledge is power, so let's keep this going. We'll see you later.